With me today, Professor Vlad Mykhnenko from the University of Oxford. Professor, welcome.
Thank you. Really I'm a big fan of Roll 10. Happy to be here.
We're hearing these messages from the White House. JD Vance warning there's no end to sight to this war. Marco Rubio, Russia and Ukraine are still so far apart that Trump may step back from mediation. Where does this leave the prospect of peace?
It's quite an intriguing moment. I think none of us know where it's going, but I mean, you need to be on a Signal app, messaging app, chat probably to get some inside information. I'm not part of that, but it is quite intriguing that effectively what has happened, in my understanding, is that the Americans have given Russians anything they wanted, and the Russians decided not to take it, and that is probably a massive blunder. You know, arrogance, stupidity, greed, all kind of those sins combined in one. So the United States administration have offered Americans Crimea and Sevastopol to be recognized as de jure Russian territories. It has offered Russians to de facto partition Ukraine according to the to the current front line gains that Russians have got, about 20% of Ukrainian territory. It has offered Russians that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO in any foreseeable future ever. It has offered the Russians sanctions relief. It has offered the Russians to give back the frozen assets, that some of it are United States. So effectively, it has given the Russians everything they wanted, really. And then Putin said, no, I want an extra little bit of cherry on the cake. The territories I never controlled or I haven't controlled, and it will take me years to capture. I want them now, and I want Ukrainian troops to retreat from Zaporizhia and Kherson. And in that moment, negotiations stopped. So that is where we stand. So I think that is probably a good moment to reflect. And I presume this is what the American administration is now doing, reflecting on what they've offered, how clever that was, and what to do now.
How do you think these threats, these comments will be being taken in Kyiv? And do you think they're directed mostly at the Ukrainians or at Moscow or both?
Probably at both, as they're trying to pretend they're negotiating. At the same time, I suspect that we wouldn't be seeing any more United States voting with North Korea, Russia, Venezuela, and Eritrea in the Security Council, because I think that shambles is already gone. I would say we should probably treat this as an incredible Ukrainian success. And once again, President Zelensky has shown that he's a big fighter and he can hold a massive punch. He did it in February 2022, and I think this is the second time he managed to hold this punch. He totally changed the terms of the rare earth and critical minerals deals. United States, that it does not resemble anything that what American offered or tried to force Ukraine to sign. And the new agreement is a very different agreement, which is very, equal and actually pretty beneficial to Ukraine. They've managed to put idea of American armaments flowing to Ukraine again back to the agenda. We are receiving some small releases of weapons now, which hopefully is a good sign for something bigger coming. So I think currently, the balance is shifting back to into Ukrainian favor at the moment.
Is it your sense we're seeing these armaments beginning to flow, but with Trump stepping back from mediation, could that mean a loss of the kind of intelligence sharing and the non-weapons support from the Americans?
I would be surprised if they're going to do that. I would be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if they want people to pay for it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Brussels would pay for American intelligence sharing, Starlink, and potentially Patriot batteries of missiles, air defense, anti-missile batteries that Ukraine desperately needs in the moment. It will be quite peculiar if Donald Trump, who wants the import-export flows to be reversed, to stop American fantastic weapons to be exported away, right? So he needs to reduce its deficit in trade, and I think any goods are goods, and therefore it will be quite peculiar for him to say that, well, you need to buy all American goods, but not these ones.
Trump, in some ways, boasted the minerals deal as a win for him. Do you think these comments we're seeing from others in the White House was it's coincidental it came so soon after the deal was agreed? Could Trump just be walking away because this is the win that he wanted?
Well, if that is the win that he wanted, he needs then to keep the territory in the American sphere of influence, right, rather than retreat back, because the further they retreat to the west, the more critical minerals and rare earth they're going to lose. And therefore, it is in Americans' interest to keep the front line at least frozen now and perhaps push it slightly back eastwards if possible. So if there is any interest in Washington D.C. about this deal being realized in the next 10 years' time, they've got to keep as much of the rare earth and minerals under their control.
Your research has long focused on the Donbass, as you say, where many of those minerals are under the ground, but also one of the most embattled parts of Ukraine for more than 10 years. Could the fact that those minerals are there, and this is an area where the Russians control a chunk of territory, could that affect how the Americans are pushing for Ukraine to give up on regaining that territory?
Well, we remember that Donald Trump a few months ago mentioned that the Russian occupied territory is a wasteland and they're just demolition zone. He mentioned that it's similar to what he did in Manhattan, demolishing houses and just bricks and debris. So there is no point of really fighting for it. He's surprised that Russians are fighting because there is no point. Obviously, under those debris, there are some critical minerals and rare earths. Obviously, it will be potentially more plausible to mine them in a horror zone rather than mine them as you are rebuilding the city. So to some extent, there may be some logic behind this. But it's very difficult to predict what they're trying to do, right? And very predict what Donald Trump is thinking at the moment, and also who are his advisors at the moment, given that Stephen Witkoff seems to be slightly less losing some power because he gave up all the. I mean, he's a total failure in diplomacy, right? With Iran, with Russians, there is nothing to show for anything. And so I hope that Donald Trump understands that he's surrounding himself with people who are loyal but absolutely incompetent.
Donald Trump suggests it's a wasteland. In some ways, this region isn't the most beautiful part of the country, but how transformative could the deal be for the region if the Russian occupiers depart?
The reconstruction and recovery of Ukrainian territories, and especially the ones in eastern Ukraine and Donbass, will take a lot of time and effort. I do not envisage those cities being rebuilt, given that a lot of the functions that those cities served are lost. It's quite intriguing that the critical minerals rare earth deal mentioned oil and gas, but doesn't mention coal. So they're not interested in coal. And that's, I'm afraid, the biggest asset that the Donbass has. And therefore, if you're not trying to recover coal mining, which I hope they won't, and you're only trying to get the really peculiar types of elements underground, from underground, then actually you might envisage a very different types of urban settlements. You might just see people, helicoptered in, do the mining, and then helicoptered back to mainland. So I think the urban geography of the region will change dramatically after the war. Obviously, it has already changed because we have wastelands and wastelands of former urban areas. But I do not see and don't quite. I wouldn't advise Ukrainians to rebuild all those cities because there is no really point.
For JD Vance, he says it's up to Russia and Ukraine now to come up with a peace deal of some sort. How likely is that without the US being involved?
Well, it depends on how we, depends how US will be involved. If the US will not provide Ukrainians with any weapons and will not share the military intelligence and will not share Starlink connections, so they totally take the Russian side effectively, aiding and abetting the invader, then it will be quite difficult, of course, for Ukraine to hold, or not to mention recapturing the territories, and Europeans are quite slow in responding. They're slower than we hope, but there is already some progress, right? 40% Ukrainian weapons are home produced, so that's a plus. 70% of casualties inflicted on Russian occupiers are by drones, which are Ukraine made. So, it won't be a total collapse of the front lines if Americans walk away. But I think it will be quite difficult for the current administration to walk away completely, given that there is still, well, first of all, the majority of Americans are pro-Ukrainian and supporting Ukraine, and the majority of the Republican Party is still pro-Ukrainian. And I think it will be quite difficult for them, because they haven't got anything to show for the first 100 days, apart from the critical minerals deal, for them to walk away and wash their hands and say, well, this is not our problem. Well, it is the US problem as well. So, we cannot predict what will going to happen, but I would suspect there is some kind of still pressure for normality from the American political parties, and hence I can't really see them just walking away totally.
You are originally from Donetsk, the
It is a
area
beautiful
of the
city,
country
Stuart. It's a
that's
beautiful city.
it's absolutely it's still occupied by Russia. It's somewhere that's been in some sort of conflict for more than 10 years. How are people there looking at the events of the last week?
We are losing gradually contact with people on the occupied territories, primarily because of the level of repression, kind of Gestapo fear that they've installed. So it's impossible to talk to people over any means of communications now. What we see, of course, is a totally devastated city in a way that men are gone, and we have, the gender imbalance quite huge. You have women on the streets, women in the shops, women shopping, women driving, women doing all the jobs, because of course there's been massive depopulation, especially of men fighting age. So that's been a disaster that uh, you know decimated the region tremendously, and it's difficult to see how the region will recover from that, for that demographic loss. Not to mention that obviously, as you mentioned, the industries were heavy industries and mining, and primarily 100%, 99% male jobs. So the whole region is quite in a really horrible state, and obviously now they understand that the Russians are not really rebuilding it, or if they are rebuilding little bits in Mariupol, they are selling it for big cash to foreign settlers, to Russian settlers. They're not giving those flats to Mariupol residents. So there is a kind of a really horrible colonial type of expansion.
Professor Vlad Mykhnenko from University of Oxford, thank you so much for your time
Thanks
today.
a lot. Thank you.